For most of the 20th century, a farmer on Okinawa could not send his own bitter gourd to Tokyo. Not for want of a buyer. It was illegal. A fly had reached the islands in 1919 and worked its way north through them over the next 55 years. And under Japan's plant protection law, anything it could lay eggs in, cucumber, pumpkin, watermelon, tomato, papaya, mango, was barred from moving to the rest of the country, or had to be fumigated first, at the grower's expense. So Japan built factories and started manufacturing the fly. It reared them by the 100 million, sterilized the pupae with cobalt, chilled the adults to 3 degrees, loaded them into a hopper on a helicopter, and poured them out over its own islands, week after week, for 22 years. About 62.5 billion of them. On the 30th of October, 1993, Okinawa Prefecture was declared free of the melon fly, and the shipping ban was lifted. I'm Arthur Beckett. 33 years later, that factory has never once been switched off, and I have spent 40 years watching control programs end the week the money did. The melon fly is about the size of a housefly, orange-brown, with smoky patches on the wings. The female lays her eggs under the skin of a fruit, and the larvae eat it from the inside. So what a grower finds is not an insect but a crop that collapses in the crate. It reached the Yaeyama Islands in 1919, Miyako by 1929, Okinawa Island itself by 1972, and the Daito Islands by 1977. Once it was there, it could not be got rid of, because the islands are full of wild and abandoned cucurbits, growing in ground nobody farms and nobody can walk. They tried the standard method first, and it is worth understanding why it failed, because the failure is the whole reason for what came next. It is called male-annihilation. You put out blocks or ropes soaked in a chemical that male flies find irresistible, mixed with an insecticide, and you take the males out of the population. On Kume Island, they ran it for 2 years, from December 1972, and at the end of it, the population was down to about half its peak. Half is a good result, and it is also useless. A fly population at 50% is a fly population. It rebuilds in a season, the quarantine stays, and you pay for the ropes again next year, and the year after that, forever. Suppression is a rent. What Okinawa wanted was ownership, which is what the sterile insect technique offers, and the idea behind it is genuinely elegant. You do not try to kill the wild flies. You breed enormous numbers of the same species, irradiate them so their sperm carries lethal damage, and release them. A wild female mates once or twice in her life. If the male she finds is one of yours, she lays a normal-looking clutch of eggs, and none of them hatch. Do that to enough females for enough generations, and the population does not decline. It stops reproducing, and then it is simply gone. The mathematics has a beautiful property. As the wild population falls, your fixed weekly release becomes a larger and larger multiple of it, so the method gets stronger exactly as the target gets rarer. Everything else in pest control gets weaker at the end. This gets stronger. That is the theory, and the first attempt did not work. On Kume, releases of 1 to 1.5 million sterile flies a week did nothing measurable to the wild population at all. Between 1.5 and 2 million, the eggs started failing to hatch, but the fruit was still being infested. It was only above 3.5 million a week, 2 to 3 times what the pilot had been designed around, that the population actually collapsed. There was a second problem, and it is the one that says most about what these programs really are. The flies coming out of the factory were bad at flying. Somebody worked out that sifting the pupae out of the pupation bed at 3 days old was damaging them, and that waiting until 5 or 6 days fixed it. That is the level at which this is decided, not the physics of the cobalt source, the day you sieve. The pilot worked in the end. Sterile releases began on Kume in September 1975. The last infested fruit was found in October 1976, and the island was confirmed clear in September 1978. 58 square kilometers, 264 million flies. Then they built the real thing. A mass-rearing plant went up in Naha from 1980, designed for 100 million pupae a week, with its own irradiation facility finished by 1983. The radiation source was cobalt-60, imported from Canada. The dose was 70 grays, delivered to the pupae about 2 days before the adults emerged, enough to wreck the sperm, not enough to stop the fly flying and courting. Adults were fed crude sugar and dried yeast, 4 to 1. Eggs were collected on pumpkin juice. Every fly was dusted with fluorescent powder before release, so that anything caught in a trap afterwards could be told apart under a lamp, ours or wild. And then it went island by island, in order, each one a bigger square on the map. Miyako from December 1983, aerial releases from the following August, clear by November 1987, 227 square kilometers, 6.3 billion flies. Okinawa Island itself from May 1986, clear on the 1st of November 1990, 1,379 square kilometers, a wild population estimated at 110 million, a peak release rate of 185 million sterile flies every week, and 31 billion flies in total. Yaeyama from October 1989, clear in October 1993, 585 square kilometers, 15 billion flies. None of it went smoothly. There were what the reports call hotspots, pockets where the wild flies would not go down, and each one meant an unplanned supplementary campaign at 6 million extra flies a week. On Okinawa Island, they had cut the release rate to 20 million a week and had to put it back up to 40. And the factory strain itself had to be thrown out and replaced 3 times over the project, because flies bred for generations in trays stopped being the animal you are trying to outcompete. The published work found the reared flies had shifted the time of day at which they mate, which is the quietest possible way for a program like this to fail, because a sterile male courting at 4 in the afternoon is worth nothing to you if the wild ones are courting at 6. 2 things about the headline numbers, because I have used them myself in this film, and you should know how firm they are. 62.5 billion flies is the government's figure for the whole national effort, and it includes the Amami Islands, which are a different prefecture running a parallel program. The per-island figures published for Okinawa's 3 groups sum to about 53 billion. The project office's own paper in 1993 said approximately 50 billion. Add the Amami total that circulates, and you go over 64. Those cannot all be right, and the honest position is that the number depends entirely on what you are counting, and nobody has reconciled it. 62.5 billion is round because it is a round number, not because somebody counted flies. And this was not the first time it was done. The United States Department of Agriculture erased the melon fly from rota in the Mariana Islands in 1962 and 63, using 257 million flies over 11 months. Japan's program was vastly bigger, and it was the first at the scale of a whole prefecture. It was not the first. What it bought is real, and I want to give it properly. Okinawan mango can be shipped to mainland Japan without heat treatment. Goya, the bitter gourd, goes nationwide, and Okinawa now grows more than a third of Japan's entire production. 22 years, 20.4 billion yen, 440,000 man-days of labor. And at the end of it, a group of islands got the right to sell their own fruit to their own country. And the factory kept running. It is running now. Somewhere between 26 and 70 million sterile melon flies are released across Miyako, Yaeyama and the surrounding islands every week of every year, 33 years after the species was declared gone, backed by more than 500 fixed traps checked on a rota. The rearing facility is about 40 years old, and the prefecture has said publicly that it needs replacing. That is not a failure. That is what the win looks like. The species is not there. It is not there because a building in Naha makes it every week and throws it into the sky. And on the day that building stops, the arithmetic reverses, because Taiwan is 110 kilometers from Yonaguni, and the flies can ride weather. The New World screwworm is a blowfly whose larvae eat living flesh, a cow, a dog, a deer, a person. 2 American entomologists, Edward Knipling and Raymond Bushland, worked out the sterile release idea and proved it on Curaçao in 1954, releasing something like 100 to 400 sterile flies per square mile per week over a 440 square kilometer island. It was clear within months. The United States then ran the same method up from Florida and across the Southwest and declared itself free in 1966, at a cost of tens of millions. Except it was not over in 1966. Texas recorded more than 90,000 confirmed cases in 1972, and a single outbreak in 1976 cost producers $132 million. What 1966 actually marks is the moment the fight moved south of the border. Since 2006, a factory at Pecora in Panama has held a curtain of about 20 million sterile flies a week across the Darien Gap, 60 miles wide, at roughly $15 million a year, a permanent wall of manufactured insects between 2 continents. In 2023, that wall failed. Panama went from around 25 cases a year to more than 6,500. The fly reached Chiapas in November 2024, was found 60-odd miles from the Texas border in September 2025, and on the 3rd of June this year, it turned up in a 3-week-old calf in Zavala County, Texas, the first case in an American animal in 60 years. By August, there were 44 confirmed infestations across 22 Texas counties and 1 in New Mexico. And across Central America and Mexico, the outbreak had produced over 200,000 animal cases and more than 2,000 human ones since 2023. The response is to build the animal again. A converted plant at Metapi in Mexico opened in June. Ground was broken in April on a new facility at Moore Air Base in Texas that is budgeted at $750 million and is meant to reach 300 million flies a week by 2028. The target is 500 million sterile screwworms a week, manufactured indefinitely, to restore a line that held for 17 years and then did not. It has been rebuilt from nothing once before. In 1988, the screwworm crossed the Atlantic in livestock and established itself in Libya, the only time it has ever left the Americas. Over 10,000 cases in the second half of 1990 alone, across 25,000 square kilometers. 1.3 billion pupae were flown in from the plant in Mexico, releases climbing to 40 million a week, and the last case was recorded in April 1991. Under $35 million, and it never came back. Though I should say that a paper in the Journal of Medical Entomology in 1996 asked, in its title, whether it was the sterile flies or the weather that did it. Full-rate releases only began at the end of March, and the last case was in April, which is a very short overlap for an area that size. There is one method that does not need the factory to keep running, and it works the opposite way round. Instead of sterilizing mosquitoes, you infect them with a bacterium called Wolbachia that blocks dengue from replicating inside them, and that spreads itself through the wild population because infected females' eggs survive, and uninfected females' eggs, mated to infected males, do not. The only randomized controlled trial of it ran across 24 clusters in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, and found a 77% reduction in dengue, with a confidence interval from 65 to 85. In northern Queensland, the releases ran an average of 11 weeks per area, and then stopped completely. And a decade later, the bacterium was still in over 93% of the mosquitoes, with no measurable drift. 11 weeks against 22 years. It is not invulnerable. In Rio de Janeiro, the frequency crashed below 10% and stayed there, apparently after the city switched larvicide, exposing a brutal egg viability cost in the infected line. Under 5% hatching against 45, and it does not always work at all. British Columbia built a $7.4 million factory at Osoyoos in 1993 to erase the codling moth from its apple valleys. It is still there, releasing about 135 million sterilized moths every summer, 32 years on, and the program's own literature now states plainly that eradication is not the goal. It became suppression. The moths breed in backyard apple and quince trees nobody manages, and moths reared in trays are poor at competing, so the last 1% of the population costs more than the first 99. The mirror image of all this is happening in the North Pacific, and it is the one that unsettles me most. Around 5 billion juvenile salmon are manufactured in hatcheries and released into that ocean every year, the largest deliberate production and release of a vertebrate anywhere on Earth. Japan alone puts in over 1 billion chum fry annually, and has done for 40 years. Japanese chum returns peaked at 88 million fish in 1996. They are now around 19 or 20 million, and a meta-analysis of 51 estimates found that early-generation hatchery fish spawning in the wild have roughly half the reproductive success of wild fish. 46 of those 51 estimates came in below par. You can run the factory forever and still lose the animal. Okinawa's melon fly is gone, and it is a genuine, quiet, enormous achievement, done by people whose names are in nobody's mouth over 22 years by sieving pupae on the right day and checking traps on a rota. But nobody won anything. They bought something on installments, and the installments do not stop. A factory is not a solution, it is a subscription. And there is a coda to it that I did not expect to find. Since March 2024, a related fly has been turning up on Okinawa, a different species, in the same crops. Emergency quarantine measures came into force in April 2025 and currently run to 2027. Okinawan cucurbits are, right now, under domestic shipping restriction again. 32 years after the ban was lifted, a farmer on Okinawa needs government inspection to send produce out of the control zone. They are planning to build another factory. If you want more stories about the strange, unfinished work behind victories like this, subscribe to the channel. Somewhere south of all this, in the Southern Ocean, there is an island where 5 cats were put ashore at a weather station in 1949, and 40 years later, South Africa spent 14 years killing every one of their descendants. For now, thank you for keeping the factory running with me.